Good morning. My name is Nick Quinn.
And I'm Adam Olson. And in this podcast, we are tasked with making comparisons between HBO's The Wire and the real world.
We thought there would be no better way to achieve this task than to draw parallels between the operations of the Baltimore Police Department depicted in the show and our local Eau Claire Police Department.
In order to gain more knowledge on the insides and outs of our local police department, we decided to communicate with Officer Bridget Coit of the ECPD via multiple email exchanges.
By doing this, we received enough information about the working of the Eau Claire Police Department to accurately compare specific aspects of the ECPD to the Baltimore Police Department depicted in the show.
One of the major issues faced by the Baltimore Police Department in the show is combating the illegal drug trade. The show follows multiple drug gangs like the Barksdale Crew or Marlowe's Gang, all of which make their money by selling opioid-based drugs like heroin, or as it's referred to in the show, spider bags or yellow cabs.
The massive amount of opioids that has flooded the streets of the United States over the last 30 years has resulted in the problem that we all know too well as the opioid crisis. As we've learned through the semester, through The Wire, as well as class readings, the opioid crisis has destroyed countless communities and taken many lives of addicts throughout the country. We asked Officer Coit how the opioid crisis has affected Eau Claire, and her answer was surprising.
Surprising? Have the opioids already taken over Eau Claire?
No. She actually said, although we are aware of the opioid crisis, we still feel the effects of meth far greater than opioids. Opioids are very common in the eastern and southern part of Wisconsin due to their proximity to the Twin Cities. Our greatest problem is still meth. With that said, we have seen a rise in opioid use in our community within the past few years. We see and feel these effects in the calls for service to check someone's welfare, EMS overdose calls, OWIs, and possession of heroin or prescription opioids.
So you are telling me that the ECPD isn't focusing on opioids like the Baltimore Police Department, but rather meth?
That's exactly what she's saying. Though the ECPD isn't entirely focused on opioids, Eau Claire County officers are trained and equipped with Narcan. Narcan, which is an opioid antagonist, is used for the complete or partial reversal of opioid overdose. Narcan is also used for diagnoses of suspect or known acute opioid overdose. So even though the ECPD doesn't encounter opioids on a regular basis, they're still prepared for the issue.
So how do you know what to prepare for? I know in The Wire, the Baltimore Police Department used CompStat meetings to discuss issues in crime throughout the department's districts. The CompStat meetings in the show were run by the deputy chief with an iron fist. There was fear and tension always present throughout the CompStat scenes. Officers would lose rank during the meeting for not adhering to the standards of the police chief.
It's a good thing that CompStat meetings aren't that theatrical in real life.
You're right. Since The Wire is a TV show and considered a drama, director David Simon felt the need to dramatize everyday functions of police work in order to develop characters and maintain momentum on the show.
But the ECPD doesn't hold CompStat meetings for dramatic effect. As Officer Coit put in 2015, the ECPD started using CompStat leaders like the chief, deputy chiefs, lieutenants, and crime analysts meet on a quarterly basis to review quarterly cases and statistics. They also discuss neighborhood, district, or community-wide issues and what each patrol or detective group is going to do to combat those issues. Officer Coit has been a part of many of these meetings and says the communication that occurs in these meetings is very beneficial. It allows the police to review what has happened, see how that compares with previous crime trends, and how to move forward.
So, it sounds like Eau Claire CompStat meetings are similar to the YouTube examples of the NYPD CompStat we saw in class. Boring, but beneficial. But how can police departments stay on top of crime when CompStat meetings only occur 4 times a year? I know from The Wire, the West Side holds daily meetings before shifts to brief the officers on crime in the district. But that's only communication within a district. Do departments communicate in other ways than CompStat?
Yes, they do. Officer Coit explained that communication is taken very seriously at the ECPD. The ECPD also has daily briefings for their officers as they do on the show. Officer Coit also mentioned that operations strategy meetings occur in between the quarterly CompStat meetings. These are smaller meetings between the lieutenants and crime analysts to discuss monthly or weekly crime trends, resources that the police have available, and strategies to deal with these issues. Meetings like this help foster communication. On top On top of that, Officer Coit said that the department heads are constantly communicating.
Sounds like the ECPD has a lot in common with the Baltimore Police Department in the show. That makes sense because The Wire is famous for accurately depicting how a police force operates.
Though that may be true, Officer Coit explains that though The Wire does accurately emulate certain aspects of normal police work, like how long a case might take to solve, the show isn't an accurate representation of how the ECPD runs. Mostly because Baltimore is a much larger city than Eau Claire, she exclaims that police departments in larger cities have more problems with communication, working through districts, and working with the public. We were assured, though, that Eau Claire doesn't suffer from these problems.
So it sounds like Officer Coit isn't saying that The Wire is inaccurate in depicting the Baltimore Police Department. She's saying the police department that The Wire depicts isn't similar to the ECPD, but she does acknowledge that other police departments of larger sizes around the country can operate in a similar way to that in which The Wire depicts.
That makes sense when you think about it. The streets of Eau Claire look nothing like the streets of Baltimore that we see in The Wire.
That's so true. You're not seeing people begging for money on the streets. You're not seeing drug dealers on every corner. You really see a lot of normal people walking around doing everyday life.
Yeah, you wouldn't expect to see Bubbles selling plain white tees at Carson Park.
So in all, you can't blame David Simon for his depiction of the police department in The Wire, because you have to look at The Wire as being a commentary of all social aspects of life, not just police, but also every day on the streets or how other people are forced to live just because the
Another
situation.
main theme visited in The Wire is chain of command. Specifically, how chain of command may get in the way of actual police work.
We see chain of command getting in the way of police work during the third season when elections are happening and subpoenas are being prevented from being sent out in order to protect certain officials who are up for re-election that year.
Another example of chain of command in The Wire is when Lieutenant Daniels refused to reopen the case on Stringer Bell when Detective McNulty asked for it. Even though Stringer Bell was a known drug dealer, it was Daniels' call on whether or not to reopen the case because he was placed in charge of the task force.
When we asked Officer Bridget Coit about her ideas on chain of command and how it can get in the way of police work, she said, and I quote, "I think like any workplace or large institution, there are barriers to try and work through. This can include communication issues, personality issues, and or sometimes a lack of understanding between work groups. We also have to follow laws that legislature has made, and sometimes these are written in complicated ways that make the actual enforcement of them hard. For example, the texting while driving statute."
She also adds that in addition, each city, county, state, and law enforcement agencies are different. There are some agencies that everyone gets along and things go very smoothly. They also let their mission statements and core values dictate how they function in the community. There are also some agencies in which this doesn't happen. If an agency in itself does not function well, that can reflect on the community it is trying to serve and can surely get in the way.
Speaking of police and society, wouldn't you say that the relationship between the police department and the community is an important bond that can make a huge impact on crime and police effectiveness?
I'd certainly say so.
And I agree. However, did you really see a lot of that in The Wire?
No, not really. Except for the one stats meeting that they had with the townspeople.
Oh,
That-
yeah, I know what you're talking
That's
about.
the only really example of the police really communicating and making a relationship with the community that they're policing.
There's also that one part where Ellis starts becoming involved within the community, where he starts making friends with the youngings that are on the street that are doing the call outs and doing things like that. He starts to get to know their names and start to make friends with them in order for himself to get information on the drug trade and the drug crimes that are occurring within the city.
It's no surprise that the ECPD believes that the relationship between the police department and the community is an important one too. The ECPD immerses itself and creates a bond with its community in a number of different ways.
Some of the examples that we discovered were they attend every neighborhood meeting that occurs. They have school resource officers in every high school and middle school. They offer spending time connecting with youth at boys and girls clubs. They do bike patrol to communicate with people in our parks and making themselves more accessible to the public. There are numerous social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Nextdoor, to let community members know what they are doing and provide feedback to them. They attend hundreds of community events every year and host some of their own. They provide tours of the PD to groups and allow citizens to do ride-alongs. They also have officers on the countless committees with the community. The 100-day sprint to avoid individual experiencing homelessness housing at the Meth Response Committee. The National Alliance on Mental Illness are all examples of ways that the ECPD get themselves involved in the community.
Officer Coit also explained that they try very hard to connect with the community in many ways because they know that it's so. But the relationship between the police and the community goes both ways, though. As Officer Coit points out, in partnership with our community is our slogan. We truly believe that it takes continual communication to build trust with every member of our community. If our community trusts us and is willing to work with us, we will know about problems and can work together from many different angles to solve the problem. Law enforcement alone cannot solve problems. It takes a community to solve problems. Therefore, how citizens choose to shape social culture can aid in our work. Example of this is environmental design, or drinking culture. How society chooses to design and utilize parks can reduce or eliminate crime that can occur in parks. Also, if a society chooses to combat binge drinking, the problems associated with binge drinking, like OWIs, disorderly conduct, noise issues, etc., can be greatly reduced.
We can relate this idea of having a positive relationship between the community and the police to The Wire, because within The Wire there was a lack of this kind of relationship at all. The lack thereof of this relationship was based on how the police treated the members of the community, as well as how gangs were treating the members of community when they found out that they were aiding investigations or they were going to be witnesses of trials.
Wow, Adam, I think we just drew a whole bunch of parallels between The Wire and our local police force.
I agree, Nick. I think we did a very good job of just comparing the two not so similar yet similar entities.
That concludes our podcast for today, so don't be afraid to smash that like button and tune in next week when we learn about forest fires. Can you stop them?
Can you?